When Henry VIII split England from the Church of Rome, an aspect of the broad campaign of reform and iconoclasm was the exposure of fraudulent religious imagery, revealing to the public that the revered and miraculous moving statues were in fact mere mechanical devices operated by an unseen priest. These and other forged miracles were theological lightning rods for the age's religious and political thunder. This paper views the exposure and exile of medieval mechanical religious sculpture and the appearance at court soon after of Renaissance hydraulic and pneumatic automata as reflective of the transfer of power from church to state in early modern England. The disappearance of miracles from churches and the flourishing of a new kind of wonder steeped in magic and mystery in gardens and palaces positioned the wealthy and cultured as heirs of the Roman Church's claim to supernatural powers. The secret of bringing statues to life figured in the rituals of gods and rulers for millennia in antiquity. Mesopotamian and Egyptian ritual hinged on the harnessing of some divine celestial quality, and this association between man, the natural world, and the stars is the shared backbone of Hermetic philosophy and Renaissance magic, whose full impact on early modern Europe is still being explored. The tradition of god-making magic to invest a man-made statue with life was known to Renaissance cognoscenti principally from the Asclepius text of the Corpus Hermeticum, as well as from some of the late antique Neoplatonic philosophers' writings on theurgy. This religious and philosophical aspect informed a concurrent mechanical tradition which produced the living cult statues which inhabited temples in Hellenistic Alexandria and elsewhere. Some devices' workings are known through Ctesibius, preserved in fragmentary form in the works of Vitruvius, his successor Philo of Byzantium, and Hero of Alexandria. These designs, which harnessed the powers of water, air, and heat, were rediscovered and published in both Latin and vernacular languages by the close of the 16th century. At the same time, they were being enthusiastically applied by Italian and French hydraulic engineers of the 16th century in order to produce elaborate tableaux at princely villas and water gardens. The first appearances of these animated figures in waterworks in England followed on the heels of the dissolution of the Church's monopoly on miraculous moving statues. With the stripping of power from the Church by exposing their miraculous moving statues' mechanical operations, the power to animate man-made statues passed wholly to the royals and their orbits. As the Anglican Church coalesced with the king rather than the Pope at its head, so too did some of its former mysteries transfer to the crown. The story of the moving religious imagery in both Alexandrian temples and English Catholic churches concludes with their destruction and the exposure of their workings, at the initiative respectively of Pope Theophilus of Alexandria in the late 4th century and Henry VIII's Church of England in the mid-16th century. Widespread iconoclasm during this period in England ensured that only a handful of medieval roods have survived to the present day, some hidden in church walls and rediscovered many centuries later. The most emblematic of the fraudulent miracles inveighed against as one of the paradigms of popish deceit was the Rood of Grace, a mechanical Christ on a crucifix at Boxley Abbey in Kent from the 14th century. Its original appearance may be gleaned from surviving pilgrim badges featuring its likeness. During the Reformation, its workings were exhibited to the masses at Maidstone, and later brought before Henry VIII at Westminster to expose its fraud. The Rood originally displayed a wide range of movement, bowing, straightening up, shaking hands and feet, nodding its head, and a range of emotional expressions made possible by moving eyebrows, eyes, and lips able to be manipulated by strings of hair. However, before approaching the mechanized Christ, pilgrims would pass before another mechanical contrivance in the figure of St. Romuald, which effected a gesture reminiscent of a much older Egyptian practice, the Hanu blessing. In ancient Egypt, this entailed a movement of the arm or the head of a god statue in response to a query. Such dependence on divine will invested this performance with a great deal of temporal power, as in the case when the new king was chosen by Hanu from a line of princes, which was, in reality, the priest's manipulation of its hidden mechanism. A contemporary of the medieval English St. Romuald reveals this kinship through function. By the help of an engine fixed to the back thereof, a kind of foot pedal allowed the priest to move the hands of what seemed to be a stone statue and to grant, by mechanical proxy, acknowledgement of the purity of those who sought the root of grace. A secondary feature was a rigged test of religious faith and physical test in the stamp of the Arthurian legend's enchanted sword in the stone. The reactionary religious climate which prevailed through the late 16th and early 17th centuries Tudor line of succession dictated that the magical, Neoplatonic, and Hermetic-derived automata did not yet thrive at the English court as they did at its continental counterparts. Nevertheless, the philosophical ground was prepared in large part by the Elizabethan magus John Dee and his circle under the benevolent approval of Elizabeth I. Dee possessed an extensive library of Neoplatonic, Hermetic, and magical works, and his collection was open between 1570 and 1583 to a wide swath of persons, including scholars and mechanicians, as well as royalty and nobles. In Dee's mathematical preface, he asserts the inseparability of practical and mystical mathematics. The practitioner, like the bee, derived both useful wax and delightful honey from the same flower. Dee passed his enthusiasm for Renaissance magic to the Elizabethan Renaissance and later courts to come. At the heart of the Renaissance magical tradition embraced by Dee was the doctrine of a correspondence between man and planetary rulers, and in consequence, the inherent capacity of man to manipulate higher realms. A practical side of this dogma can be read in the Asclepius text instructions to invest a statue with life-giving spiritus, and Neoplatonist philosophers of late antiquity incorporated the manufacture of thus invested living statues under their mantle of theurgy. The union of religion and pneumatic engineering relied on the force of the unseen but manifestly powerful air, which as a concept was only beginning to become divorced from the metaphysical idea of spirit. This blend of the spiritual with the mechanical survived in Renaissance thaumaturgy. The idea of a mechanical object participating in sacred harmony with a higher realm of mathematics allowed the Renaissance magus and mechanician alike to realize the magical automata of their day. One of Queen Elizabeth's favorite gardens to visit was also the only garden in England which brought her into contact with grottos and automata in the continental style. Sir Francis Carew rose to fame and favor through the great house and garden he created on his family's estate in Beddington, Surrey. A description from 1600 of a stream which flows through a number of hydraulic automata, including Polypheme playing the pipe, and a hydra out of whose many heads the water gushes. 11 years later, another visitor noted all sorts of neatly made animals and little men as though they were alive. In the 1570s, payments were made to the French gardeners responsible for realizing the waterworks, and these early Elizabethan automata, water effects, and grottos were directly modeled after French assimilations of originally Italian forms. Florence was the epicenter of Hermeticism and Neoplatonism's shockwaves through the 15th century, with the wide dissemination of Marsilio Ficino's translated texts and original philosophy. Florentine garden design by the last quarter of the 16th century showcased animated automata in artificial garden grottos, fantastic liminal spaces between myth and reality. Francesco Primo de' Medici's Villa Pratolino boasted more grottos and automata than any previous construction, and imitations of its features are scattered widely through the royal and aristocratic gardens of Europe for centuries to come. The magical, the heretical, and the forbidden functioned as incentives rather than obstacles to Francesco Primo's patronage of wide-ranging inquiries into the mysteries of nature. In effect, these magical automata, which emerged from the spirit of experimentalism fostered by 16th century natural magic, presented alternatives, rooted in the ancient pre-Christian traditions, to medieval churches' miraculous statues. In the stylistic backwater of England, animated automata and other trappings in the stamp of the Florentine Mannerist style arrived later than at its continental counterparts. The Elizabethan and Jacobean courts could not offer comparative social prestige, which awaited the era's artist, architect, hydraulic engineer, or magus on the continent. While his predecessors on the throne's focus was devoted to the affairs of state, Prince Henry, in the patronage model of his mother Queen Anne of Denmark, reimagined the esoteric Mannerist currents flowing from Florence and Prague through a Protestant lens. Until 1625, sculpture in England remained dead in every sense of the word, not only static affairs visually, but commissioned almost exclusively for tombs and sacred spaces. Although there are known examples of ornamental waterworks from the Tudor period, such as the lead pipes which brought water to the ornamental pool at Theobald's through two sculpted serpents' mouths, very few living statues proliferated in the Renaissance English garden at this point. A tide change was signaled by the planning of hydraulic engineering works in England in earnest at the initiative of Prince Henry, which, if it had been fully realized, would have constructed a Stuart Pratolino, full of virtuosic displays of the spectacular marriages of the age's achievements in the arts, sciences, and philosophical currents. Prince Henry has been named the prince par excellence of Renaissance Hermetic science in England, and like Francesco Primo de' Medici and Rudolph II, who were the vanguard of the late Renaissance embrace of the esoteric knowledge on the continent, the Prince of Wales favored direct observation of those at work, yea, even those of mechanical and mean persons. His court mirrored this fascination for scientific inquiry and experimentation and actively sought to engage proven masters of the style, namely Tommaso and Alessandro Francini, who had worked at Pratolino and successfully introduced the same line of automata, grottos, and fountains for the French court as Saint-Germain-en-Laye and Fontainebleau. Henry, however, did not get his first choice, but another Florentine artist in service to the French royal house was made available. The engagement from 1611 to 1615 of the Florentine Constantino de' Servi brought direct experience with the Medici grottos and automata to England. De' Servi's earliest and formative experiences were under Bernardo Buontalenti, the master architect to Francesco Primo's Mannerist Mecca. De' Servi's sojourn in England appears also to have been in service as a spy, as records indicate that he was kept on the Medici payroll through all his postings, which may explain why such a widely traveled artist succeeded in realizing so few works. However, a rare completed drawing of De' Servi's garden for Prince Henry is a testament to a real skill, or at least ambition, though his full vision was never realized, stymied in part by the monarchy's perennial tightness of funds. At Richmond Palace, the first major royal building erected since the 1530s, he projected a huge Neptune, which was to be 3 times the size of John Bologna's Apennine at Pratolino. Whereas the original possessed a series of internal grottos, fountains, and tableaux of moving automata, De' Servi similarly imagined an expanded version, with many rooms in it, a great dovecot in the head, and 2 grottos in the base. Further grottos and fountains were planned, and De' Servi at the time wrote proudly of Prince Henry's delight in his designs, explicitly including fountains and grottos among them. His disastrous command of theatrical machinery, though, which marred the Campion's masque for the marriage of the Earl of Somerset in 1613, does not instill tremendous faith in his engineering. De' Servi was to be eclipsed by the arrival at court of the French Huguenot Salomon de Cos, who had studied firsthand the hydraulic wonders at Pratolino, the Villa d'Este at Tivoli, and other lavish Italian water gardens of note. Unlike De' Servi, de Cos successfully constructed works directly inspired by Pratolinos, including a Mount Parnassus with Apollo, Muses, and 4 descending rivers at Somerset House, and a grotto aviary at Greenwich. De Cos's series of engravings in his 1615 book Les Raisons des Forces Mouvantes document their appearances and affinities with their models at Pratolino. De Cos's works for Henry at Richmond Palace, however, remain, like De' Servi's, elusive ghosts, as no descriptions of this elaborate series of grottos was left. Other engravings in the Raison, published after Henry's death, are revealed by Decaux to have been executed to satisfy the prince's taste for the novel, and many of these images bear a close resemblance to the Pratolino automata and grottos. Decaux often directly cites Pratolino's forms. The automaton of a female Galatea is a well-known citation, as also appears a winged female holding a trumpet on top of an artificial hill. We find its inspiration in the Fame automaton of Pratolino, documented by the artists Giovanni Guerra and Stefano della Bella, about a century removed from each other. Another Colossus, this one seated, likewise derived from John Bologna's renowned Apennine. Notwithstanding that many of the most grandiose examples drawn on paper of what would have become the English Mannerist style never were constructed after Prince Henry's catastrophic death in 1612, the reintroduction of automata and illusionistic machinery around the Tudor and Stuart courts resurrected a phenomenon formerly invested heavily with religious significance, forcefully extinguished only less than a century prior. In the church, the court theatre, or the garden grotto, moving sculpture inspired not only feelings of wonder and surprise, but also their presence put in exposition both ancient and contemporary philosophical and mechanical secrets of the thaumaturgical class, be they temple priests, medieval abbots, or Renaissance magi, mathematicians, and engineers. Water not only articulated the power ideology of the ruler, as Roy Strong asserted, a visual demonstration of the source of all political, cultural, and material largesse and patronage. It was key to bringing to life the garden sculpture of the late Renaissance. The ability of the hydraulic engineer to harness the forces of water, fire, and especially air, which carried with it the mantle of Stoic and Neoplatonic philosophers' concept of the spirit pneuma, closely intertwined with the natural magic of the day. And the Renaissance magus, unlike his predecessors in antiquity and the Middle Ages, were inherently practical. The hydraulic engineer's feats were blunt articulations that the ambition of Hermetic science had been achieved. Man wielded control over nature. He had mined her secrets and implemented them for his own betterment. In England, where the power of miraculous crucifixes and living saints in churches had been annulled by the revelation of their mechanisms, both the technology and its instruments could freely assume another role, no less invested with spiritual implication, as handmaiden in the magus and natural philosopher's quest for the domination of nature and the discovery of her secrets.